Come closer. I want to tell you about a line drawn in the dirt. Not just any line, the first border of what would become the greatest empire the world has ever known. But empires, you see, are not born from noble dreams. They are born from blood. Let me take you to a hill beside the Tiber River, on a morning when the world was young and two brothers stood on opposite sides of everything that would matter. The furrow is shallow at first. Romulus drags the bronze plow blade through the rocky soil of the Palatine Hill, his shoulders straining against the weight of the wooden handle. Behind him, the earth splits open in a dark, straight line, not much wider than a man's hand, not deeper than his thumb. But this is no farmer's furrow. This is sacred ground he carves. This is the boundary of a city that does not yet exist, marked by ritual older than memory. Where the plow cuts, no enemy may cross. Where the earth bleeds, Rome will stand. But what happens when a brother refuses to recognize a boundary? What happens when love and ambition occupy the same heart, and only one can survive? Remus watches from across the shallow valley, his own followers gathered behind him on the Palatine Hill. Twin brothers, raised by the same wolf, blessed by the same gods, yet already the distance between them feels unbridgeable. The auguries have spoken. Romulus saw 12 vultures in the sky. Remus saw only 6. In the ancient world, this is how the gods choose kings, through the flight of carrion birds, through the direction of lightning, through the entrails of sacrificed sheep. But brothers do not always accept what the gods decide. Romulus moves with the certainty of a man who believes destiny flows through his veins. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, he speaks in commands rather than requests. The shepherds who follow him do so because he promises them something they have never had: permanence. A place that will not be raided, will not be burned, will not disappear with the next drought or plague. Remus is different. Lighter in build, quicker to laugh, he leads through persuasion rather than intimidation. His followers love him for his gentleness, but love does not always translate to obedience. 12 vultures, Romulus had announced that morning, his voice carrying across the valley. The gods have chosen. But Remus, standing on his own hill with his own dreams, had shaken his head slowly. I saw my 6 before you saw your 12, brother. The gods spoke to me first. And so the furrow becomes not just a boundary, but a challenge. Not just a sacred line, but a scar across the heart of a family. This is Italy in the 8th century before Christ, a land of hills and marshes, olive groves and sacred springs. Greek merchants sail up the Tiber bringing wine and bronze and stories of distant cities. Etruscan kings rule from their hill towns to the north, their tombs filled with gold and their priests reading the future in thunder. The Latins, the people Romulus and Remus claim as their own, live in scattered villages, their wooden huts clustered around wells and temples. They grow barley and tend sheep. They worship gods who live in trees and springs. They bury their dead in clay urns and their living memories in songs passed down through generations. But the world is changing. Cities are rising from tribal villages. Kings are claiming power that once belonged to councils of elders. The age of wandering is ending. The age of walls has begun. On the Palatine Hill, the morning air smells of wild thyme and wood smoke. Romulus can hear the river below, brown with spring floods, carrying logs and dead animals toward the sea. This is good land, high enough to defend, close enough to water, positioned where trade routes cross. A place where a city could grow. A place worth fighting for. The ritual demands precision. The furrow must form a perfect square. At each corner, Romulus lifts the plow from the earth, creating gaps where gates will stand. His followers chant prayers to Terminus, the god of boundaries, to Mars, the god of war. But across the valley, Remus grows restless. His men whisper among themselves, why should they follow a boundary they had no voice in creating? Why should they accept a king chosen by vultures? Look at him, one of them says, pointing toward Romulus with his bronze-tipped spear. Drawing lines in the dirt like a farmer marking his fields. Does he think the earth belongs to him now? Does he think we will cower behind his little wall? The tension crackles across the valley like lightning before thunder. Hands rest on sword hilts. Eyes narrow in the morning sun. Brothers who once shared the same blanket now stand on opposite hills, measuring the distance between them in heartbeats. Remus makes his choice. He begins walking down the Palatine Hill, his followers trailing behind him like wolves following their pack leader. His destination is clear, the sacred furrow, the boundary his brother has carved without his consent. Romulus sees them coming. He sets down the plow and draws his sword, iron, hammered by Etruscan smiths, sharp enough to split bone. Stay back, he shouts across the narrowing distance. This ground is sacred now. This boundary is blessed by the gods themselves. But Remus keeps walking. Step by step, closer to the furrow. Closer to the line that divides everything. And then he jumps. One leap across the shallow furrow. One moment of defiance that shatters the sacred boundary like pottery thrown against stone. So much for your wall, brother, Remus says, landing on the other side with a smile that holds no warmth. So much for your city. What happens next takes less than a heartbeat. Romulus moves with the speed of a man who has crossed an internal boundary as surely as his brother has crossed the physical one. The iron blade finds Remus's chest, pierces ribs, stops the heart. But here is what no one expected. The moment Remus falls, Romulus drops his sword and kneels beside his brother's body. The king who will build an empire, who will conquer nations and enslave thousands, weeps like a child over the man he has just killed. I had to, he whispers to the still form. The boundary is sacred, you knew that. You made me choose between you and the city. Between love and law. Between a brother and a god. The followers of both brothers stand frozen in the sudden silence, understanding that they have just witnessed the birth of something terrible and necessary. Not just a city, but an idea. That borders matter more than blood. That law matters more than love. From this moment forward, Rome will be built on a foundation of sacred violence. Every expansion of its borders will be paid for in blood. Every enemy who crosses Roman boundaries will face the same fate as Remus. The city that rises from this hill will conquer Gaul and Britain, Egypt and Syria. It will span 3 continents and endure for 1,000 years. But it will never escape the shadow of its founding, the knowledge that its greatness was purchased with fratricide. That its first law was written in a brother's blood. The Romans themselves will tell this story for centuries, never softening its edges, never making excuses for their founder. They understand something we often forget, that power always comes with a price, and the price is always higher than we want to pay. The furrow still exists, in a way. Archaeologists have found traces of it beneath the stones of the Forum, beneath the marble steps of temples and the foundations of palaces. A shallow scratch in the earth that became a wall, that became an empire, that became a memory. But if you know where to look, if you walk the Palatine Hill in the early morning when the light is soft and the tourists have not yet arrived, you can still see it. Not the furrow itself, but its echo. The way the ground still holds the shape of that first boundary, the way the earth still remembers the weight of the plow and the warmth of blood soaking into soil. And sometimes, if you listen carefully, you can hear it too. The sound of a brother calling across a valley that no longer exists, asking a question that will never be answered. Was the city worth it, Romulus? Was it worth it?